Mars, the fourth planet from the Sun, has historically been the source of constant awe and mystery as to whether or not life exists there. 19th century astronomers believed that they saw a vast network of canals crisscrossing the surface of Mars, connecting huge Martian cities, while science fiction writers and filmmakers have given us a wealth of stories involving evil Martians coming to conquer Earth and destroy its inhabitants. The search for life on Mars has become the dominant driving force in the space exploration programs of several countries worldwide, and at the same time has proven to be one of humanity's most elusive goals over the last 3 decades. Searching for water and life forms on Mars has also evolved into the main reason for sending a human exploration mission to the Martian surface. As precursors of a planned future human mission, several unmanned probes were recently sent to Mars to search for water and evidence of life forms, and possibly provide invaluable information in humanity's ultimate quest for life on other planets. In July 1976, the first major effort to search for life on Mars was made by the U.S. space program NASA, when they successfully landed 2 unmanned multi-billion-dollar Viking probes onto the Martian surface. These highly complex spacecraft performed many scientific, geological, and atmospheric tests, as well as searching for water and direct evidence of life. While these Viking probes found a tremendous amount of subsurface water in the soil, the fundamental source of all life as we know it, the tests for the presence of life forms were promising but ultimately proved inconclusive. By 1996, in what some people believe to be the single greatest discovery in Earth history, scientists from NASA analyzed meteorites believed to come from Mars and concluded that they contain the fossilized remains of Martian life forms. These scientists theorized that a high-speed meteor impacting onto the Martian surface caused thousands of tons of rock and soil to be ejected from the planet. These ejected samples then spent perhaps millions of years in space before finally impacting at various sites here on Earth. The claims made by these NASA scientists caused a firestorm in the scientific community, and several other noted scientists disputed and discounted these claims and findings, urging that further research must be conducted on rock and soil samples on the Martian surface. Currently, there is an armada of probes that recently have been sent to Mars by NASA, the European Space Agency, the British Space Agency, and the Japanese Institute of Space and Astronautical Sciences. These unmanned probes will reach Mars at the end of 2003 and the beginning of 2004, and possibly provide new clues regarding the question of life on Mars. The first of these probes to arrive at the Red Planet is the Japanese probe, an orbiter called Planet B, or Nozomi, the Japanese word for hope. Launched in 1998, a series of unforeseen challenges has plagued its trip and delayed its arrival to Mars. The probe will now enter Martian orbit in late December 2003 to start a 2-year analysis of the Martian atmosphere.
Planet B is a spacecraft by the Japanese Space Science Organization called ISOS, and it's a mission to the Martian atmosphere and magnetosphere. The main objective is to study the interaction between the Martian atmosphere and the solar wind. Solar wind is the flow of plasma from the sun, and since the Mars does not have the magnetic field, or even if it does have, it's a very weak magnetic field, the solar wind and the Martian atmosphere get mixed in the ionosphere and produces various interactions. And the main objective of this Planet B mission is to study the mechanism of this interaction.
This spacecraft will return data on the magnetic field, the interaction between the solar wind and atmosphere, the magnitude of dust storms, as well as images of the surface. All of this information will be critical for a future human exploration mission of Mars. This Japanese mission will also have an international involvement in the probe's scientific instrument package that it will carry to Mars.
Take this Planet B, for example. It already has instrument from Canada, plasma analyzer, and another plasma analyzer from Sweden, and a dust counter from Germany.
To complement this Japanese probe study of the Martian atmosphere, NASA recently launched two powerful and technologically advanced rovers to the Martian surface named Spirit and Opportunity. Each Mars rover carries a sophisticated set of instruments to search for water and clues of life forms. Spirit will reach Mars on January 4th, 2004, and Opportunity will land on Mars on January 25th, 2004.
The time it takes for the signal to get here means that we cannot sit here on Earth and control in real time the spacecraft or the rovers on the surface of Mars. Typically, Mars is on the order of 10, 15 minutes one-way light time away, and it varies throughout the orbital year of the Earth and Mars.
Once these probes reach the Martian atmosphere, a parachute will deploy to slow the spacecraft, and airbags will inflate to cushion the landing. Two landing sites were chosen after intensive analysis of the mapping by the Mars Global Surveyor. Spirit will go to Gustav Crater, a wide basin that may once have been a lake. Opportunity's destination is Meridiana Planum, an area about halfway around Mars from Gustav Crater that has a mineral called gray hematite, normally formed in the presence of liquid water. Upon reaching the surface, each rover is expected to travel up to almost 40 meters per Martian day and log up to almost 2,000 meters during its 3-month prime mission.
But there's always a time delay from Mars, because Mars is so far from the Earth. Radio signals travel at the speed of light, and so by the time your rover is going to fall off the cliff, if you said, "Stop!" the rover would already be over the cliff. So you have to have a lot of autonomous control on your robotic vehicles.
During that time, rocks and soils will be analyzed with a set of 5 geology instruments on each rover, and a special tool will be used to expose fresh rocks for study.
So you can no longer expect to interact directly with the spacecraft in real time. You have to have smart enough spacecraft that can take care of themselves between the phone calls that you can manage to you could connect with them.
The mission will seek to determine the history of climate and presence of water at these two different sites, where conditions on Mars may once have been favorable to support life.
Our idea of the origin of life on Earth suggests that life appeared very rapidly on the Earth once the proper conditions were met. And the proper conditions were basically the presence of liquid water on the surface of the planet. So our conception of life in the universe is that if you had a planet that was Earth-like and it had liquid water, then life will be a rapidly emerging phenomenon on that planet. That's our current bias in terms of our approach to the question of life. Well, Mars is a direct test of that. We look at Mars, we see that here's an Earth-like planet, it had liquid water. We should expect then that, geologically speaking, life would have rapidly emerged on that planet.
We know Mars was warm and wet at about the same time the Earth was first evolving life. Mars had conditions that could have evolved life as well. And if it did, that means that there are now many broader range of places, a much broader range of places where you can expect to look for life. Maybe we could look for red planets that are smaller and are farther from the sun than the Earth is, for example, and have a chance of there having been life evolve on a much broader range of conditions than just the Earth. So it has profound implications for life in the universe.
In addition to all of the scientific instruments packed onto each of these rovers, they also carry technologically advanced color cameras capable of sending back 360-degree images of the Martian landscape, as well as taking close-up shots of rock and soil samples and then sending the images directly to Earth.
You can imagine if you want to explore another planet like Mars, that you need to get down to the surface of Mars in more than 1 or 2 spots. You can't imagine understanding the Earth from having landed on the Earth in just one place. It's much too complex a planet. Mars is equally complex, and we need to find a way to systematically go back to Mars every opportunity there is with a series of small probes that can land on the surface, eventually drill down beneath the surface, looking for water, looking for any other evidence of the early era, left from the early era of Mars, when there was lots of water on its surface and where simple life forms could well have evolved.
The European Space Agency's mission to Mars, called Mars Express, will not only be looking for water and life forms, but will be able to drill beneath the surface, contributing additional information to that provided by NASA's 2 rovers. This probe has 2 distinct parts: an orbiter that will stay in Martian orbit for 2 years and search for water and evidence of life, mapping the planet for a future human exploration mission, and a lander built by the British Space Agency called the Beagle 2, which will be able to drill down under the surface in its search for water and life forms. This package of probes was launched in June 2003 on board a Russian-made Soyuz rocket from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan and should reach Mars in late December 2003. The 2 packaged probes will detach from each other about 6 days before arrival at Mars. The orbiter will enter a highly elliptical polar orbit from where the scientific observations would begin. This orbiter would then map the planet using a powerful radar to probe its surface for evidence of water, as well as measuring water concentrations in the atmosphere. Shortly after the lander has detached from the orbiter, it would deploy parachutes. Then large gas bags would fill to protect it on impact. Once on the surface, the lander would begin 6 months of scientific analysis of the rocks and soils around it in the search for water, and even be able to drill down beneath the surface and analyze soil samples for any organic materials there. The lander also has a robotic arm that would reach out and grab a sample of soil or rock, then bring it to the analysis chamber for investigation looking for clues to biological activity. The lander would also check the atmosphere for traces of methane produced by living organisms. These European space probes will help provide new clues about life on Mars, such as the presence and quantity of water, and possibly signs of present or past life as well. However, while these probes will look for signs of water and clues of some organic activities and life processes, none of these probes will actually be able to find life forms it may come across.
Certainly after the Planet B and all these international missions, people will come up with the idea of doing things better. And I'm quite sure that the Mars mission will continue with much improved instrumentation and more focused ideas.
At this time, there are no tests that can be programmed to identify the presence of a specific life form.
One of the most compelling questions about Mars is, was there life, and searching for that life. But we don't really know what we're looking for. We can't even come up with a rigorous definition of life. In some sense, when people ask me, how are you going to search for life if you can't define it? The answer is, well, we'll know it when we see it.
Sending human beings to the Martian surface is perhaps the only way to firmly resolve the issue of the existence of life on Mars.
What's really saying is that you're relying on sort of the holistic, intuitive approach to exploration that humans can bring. You don't have a well-defined task that you can program into a computer and say, make this measurement, take this analysis, and then tell me what you find. It's a much more interactive process, searching for life, searching for fossils. And certainly right now, we only know how to do that with human beings.
When you send a human being to, say, Mars, we would like those human beings to do the most important things they can do during their stay on Mars. That we will know because the robots will have explored Mars well enough that we know what the most important questions are that the astronauts can help us answer, and we will know where the most important places are for those astronauts to visit. So the robotic program will lay the groundwork in terms of understanding the Mars so that we can be most effective in our initial brief human explorations of that nearby planet.
The manned Mars mission will be an international rather than a nationalistic undertaking, unlike the American Apollo space program of the 1960s and 70s. Still, the mission will not be cheap, simple, or totally without risk. The technological requirements alone are monumental.
Over the past 2 to 2.5 years, we conducted a study led from a group at the Johnson Space Center, other NASA centers, to study a human exploration mission, a human exploration program. And we have just finished, and we are compiling that report now. But what it did is put together an end-to-end scenario for human exploration of Mars.
The most critical technology that has to be developed is low-cost, reliable Earth-to-orbit access. We need a new rocket. Right now it costs $10,000 a pound to take material into low Earth orbit, and then from low Earth orbit we could transfer to Mars. For 6 missions to Mars, that would have cost $100 billion. That's unacceptable. This is the major barrier to getting to Mars.
Many scientists and engineers believe that current interplanetary rocket propulsion technology and fuel systems will be unworkable for such a large-scale Mars mission. The next generation of propulsion systems will likely involve ion or fusion reactors utilizing the light element helium-3 as primary fuel. Presently, helium-3 is being tested in laboratory fusion reactors on very small scales for eventual use in small, unmanned spacecraft propulsion systems. Eventually, this technology will be expanded and utilized in large-scale rocket boosters capable of matching the power output of current chemical propulsion systems. Helium-3 was first considered as a fuel source for interplanetary spacecraft when it was found in massive quantities and readily available on the Moon. This determination was the result of analysis of the moon rocks brought back by the Apollo astronauts. Corporate studies are currently underway to investigate the likelihood of establishing a helium-3 mining colony on the Moon. Development of this technology will also have important applications for society at large, possibly replacing fission nuclear reactors as a source of electrical energy in the 21st century.
One of the long-term benefits of a helium-3 based energy economy, and lunar helium-3 in particular, is that it enables a whole bunch of other things to happen. It enables us to bridge our way to Mars because the launch vehicles and the technology needed to settle the Moon and to extract helium-3 are essentially the same types of technologies necessary to go to Mars.
Harnessing helium-3 as an energy source not only clears the way for Mars travel, but is an important step in colonizing the Moon as well.
The primary byproduct of producing helium-3 on the Moon is hydrogen. And in the course of extracting the helium-3 and hydrogen, you also produce water. Anywhere you produce helium-3 on the Moon through heating up the soil to extract this solar wind gas, you are going to produce hydrogen and water. And those are the essential components for self-sufficiency on the Moon. And indeed may well be the source of fuel and oxygen and water for space travelers to Mars and for the early settlements on Mars.
This same technology could be utilized to produce fuel on the Martian surface. As a result, fuel for the return trip to Earth would not have to be stowed as payload on the initial flight to Mars.
This subject of extracting rocket propellant from the Mars atmosphere for the return rocket to Earth, it will save enormous amounts of money if we can produce propellant on Mars. It can save effectively half of the mass that you have to launch from Earth to Mars, which means that in general that would save about half of the cost of the mission if you didn't have it.
The atmosphere on Mars, however thin, still has carbon dioxide. We can convert that carbon dioxide with a little added hydrogen into methane fuel and oxygen for breathing gases. Perhaps there's water on Mars. We could convert that into a very high energy fuel, hydrogen and oxygen, and we could also have water to drink. We could have oxygen to breathe.
For several years, we argued, a group of us argued that closed life support systems that included plants, closed ecological life support systems, would be essential to long-term exploration of Mars or the Moon. And we tried to get people in NASA interested on the engineering side to incorporate those kinds of approaches into the mission design.
We need to take seeds with us and not foodstuffs, because foodstuffs are very heavy. So we'd like to be able to learn how to plant foodstuffs on Mars in the Martian soil, in the Martian environment. And then we'd like to figure out how to have what's called a regenerative life support system, so that we could recycle the air we breathe and we could recycle the water we drink, so we don't have to constantly take, so we don't have to take a lot more with us. If we could overcome these issues, we're on our way to Mars.
Given the cost of such a venture, it is unlikely that any single nation will assume the entire financial burden and develop all the required technologies. Likewise, the makeup of the crew will reflect the international character of the mission. Unlike the Apollo crews, which consisted solely of Caucasian American males, the Mars crew will no doubt comprise men and women from a variety of participating nations. The initial manned mission to Mars will involve a crew of 6 to 7 astronauts, 2 of whom will be pilots, with the remainder being engineers, geologists, and medical specialists. These astronauts will most likely undergo training at the International Space Station that is currently under construction, since the crew must adjust to living in space for 2 to 3 years at a time.
When we get to human missions, it's almost certain we're going to have an international endeavor, just like International Space Station Alpha. I mean, that's got Europeans, it's got Japanese, it's got Russians, it's got US, and I think that's the way we'll be going to Mars with people. So we're already international and getting more so.
The motivation for exploring Mars politically is cooperation, not competition. And cooperation by its nature is not a goal-oriented task, it's a process-oriented task. From a political point of view, what's important is not going to Mars and coming back, but the process of working together to go to Mars. So, in fact, the logic forces you the other way around. The best way to make Mars a beacon of international cooperation is to have the mission take as long as possible. Stretch it out. So I'm actually not optimistic that we're going to go to Mars and anywhere near the rush that we went to the Moon.
I could foresee a day, perhaps 10 years from now, as early as 10 years from now, where we may want to decide there's a compelling reason to go to Mars because we got the mission cost down to an affordable level, and we see scientific benefit for early human exploration. And these explorations could take place within my working lifetime.
So to get ready for possible human expeditions to Mars, we need to find out where are the interesting places to land, where are the safe places to land, where is the resources so that we can start living off the land as soon as possible. And if we can do all that, by about 2018, we hope to be able to field a human mission to Mars. So by 2018, we ought to have the technical infrastructure in place and a sufficient understanding of Mars so that we know how to send people there.
The most viable of all the launch systems proposed by NASA uses only slight modifications of current hardware involving a two-phase procedure. First, an unmanned booster rocket containing the propulsion system for the round-trip journey to Mars would be launched.
Mark 1 minute 12 seconds, coming up on period of maximum aerodynamic pressure on the vehicle. Mark 1 minute 41 seconds. Pass through max Q, still looking good.
Through max Q, and everything looks good.
Shortly thereafter, the manned vehicle, housing the habitat module and crew, would also be launched. Once in low Earth orbit, the two spacecraft would rendezvous and dock together.
Ryan is hanging in there pretty well. She looks great. The same to us. What happened now, Houston? Roger, looks like a real smooth join up. Okay, we're captured there, Houston. Roger. Houston, we're hard docked.
From there, the spacecraft would leave orbit on a trans-Martian trajectory.
Booster systems engineer reports ignition on the third stage. The thrust looks good, he says.
When we leave Earth orbit, it is very dangerous, and this radiation could be very serious for the astronauts, ultimately causing them cancer and could cause them to have very major health problems. We've got to figure out how to protect the astronauts against these cosmic rays. And we're working with new materials, we're working with screening procedures. We hope we'll be able to develop techniques for protecting the astronauts against radiation.
You could launch with just enough fuel to get you, say, to the vicinity of the moon, and then be met by a service vehicle, if you will, from the moon that would then resupply your hydrogen, your oxygen, and other materials that you need for a much longer trip to Mars. Yes, the moon can be thought of as a service station in space. You probably would not visit it on your way to Mars, but you would meet supply craft coming from the moon in order to add to your consumables or to what you need for life support, for fuel, for getting into Mars orbit and so forth.
Mars missions are constrained by the planets, by the relation in their orbits of Earth and Mars. You can only go and you can only come back at particular times. You're going for 2.5 or 3 years, and you have to take with you everything that you need, including all of the spare parts or the smarts to fix things that break. So in fact, once you commit to a Mars mission, you're going for 2.5 or 3 years, no matter how long you choose to stay on the surface of Mars.
Go for undocking. Okay, retro, go. Fido, go. Guide, go. Control, go. Telcom, go. GNC, go. Ecom, go. Surgeon, go. Capcom, we're go for undocking. Hello, Eagle, Houston, we're standing by, over.
As the spacecraft nears Mars, the landing vehicle would separate from the return module, which would remain in Martian orbit.
Eagle, Houston, we see you on the steerable, over. Roger, Eagle, undocked. Good radar data. We're now in the approach phase. Everything looking good. Altitude 4200. Houston, you're a go for landing, over.
Unique to the Mars mission is the fact that the landing craft will enter the atmosphere without assistance from the Earth-based mission control. This is due to the 15-minute communications delay caused by the 200 million mile distance between planets. Landing in this manner makes the maneuver exceedingly more difficult than the mission control-assisted moon landing of Apollo 11. As a result, success or failure would depend entirely on the skill of the crew and the spacecraft's computers.
200 feet, 4.5 down, 5.5 down. 100 feet, 3.5 down, 9 forward. Okay, 75 feet, car's looking good, down a half.
From the knowledge gained during the robotic excursions, the landing site for the Mars mission will be determined based on the location most hospitable for human beings.
Picking up some dust. Straight shadow. 4 forward, drift into the right a little. 30 seconds forward. Contact light. Okay, engine stop. We copy you down, Eagle.
When humans go to Mars, they're definitely going to be stepping into a hostile world. And it's interesting because the reason that they're going is because at one time we think Mars was very much like Earth and has degenerated to the cold world we see today. And they will have to, the humans that go will have to bring a little bubble of Earth with them in this to survive on Mars.
They will land on the surface and inhabit a set of facilities that for the most part have been put down before they were actually launched from Earth. So you would send the habitats out, you would send the rovers out, you would send the equipment for producing propellant for the return out before the crew ever left. Deliver it automatically, robotically, have it set up and waiting for the crew to get there. So the crew would come out in their habitat, go down to the surface, have this set of chambers and rovers and suits and such waiting for them.
There's been thoughts about whether we should have a national mission to Mars to plant the American flag, or whether we should do it cooperatively with other nations. It'll be very appropriate to work together because science is the domain of the human species. It'll also be an opportunity to cooperate and perhaps not have a variety of flags being planted all over Mars and starting the process all over again.
Another important consideration in determining a landing site is based on where the crew would most likely find life forms, if they indeed existed, or still exist, on Mars.
Geologists and particularly planetologists for many, many years have felt very strongly that Mars had a more Earth-like environment in its early history, and that if life was forming on Earth 3.5 to 4 billion years ago, then almost certainly the same processes were occurring on Mars, and that we ought to see evidence of that when we get there.
It would be somewhat surprising if one would have had on Mars similar conditions as we had on Earth, say 4 billion years ago, and life would not have developed there. I would say, and I am convinced, that if there was life once on Mars, it was life with the same kind of mechanism as life produces itself and replicates itself on the Earth.
Mars and Earth were similar enough in their early history, we think, that it's likely that if life evolved on Mars, it's probably going to be similar in some broad context to life on Earth. If we were searching for life on Pluto or somewhere completely different than the Earth, then of course we could not expect it to be Earth-like. But Mars is similar enough that it's probably going to have, in broad brush, the same kind of systems that we have. And that's good, because it means that we have a chance of being able to recognize it when we see it. So I think the secret to to searching for evidence of life on Mars is to go to ancient lake beds, go to places that are now dry, but at one time had a lake, and to dig down through the sediments in the bottom of those lake beds and look for evidence of organisms that would have lived in that lake.
So we'll be able to see if there was ever, maybe be able to see if there was ever life on Mars, see if we can find some indications of, if you find fossil scum around the edge of the lake bed, you know there was life there. Maybe we probably won't find that, but maybe we can find some indications.
Is there now life on Mars? We don't know. There certainly are potential niches, ecological niches, where life might have evolved, as very simple forms of life might have evolved in order to survive to the present day. We just don't know, and that's one of the things that's going to be exciting about the investigations of Mars.
The thin Martian atmosphere allows that the solar radiation, the solar UV, penetrates towards the surface, and in this way sterilizes this everything, kills any possible forms of life. There has been the suggestion that life might have retreated towards certain niches at depths, and so this cannot definitely not be absolutely excluded.
The surface of Mars today is much too dry and much too cold for life. The only possibility that we can see now that there might still be life on Mars is if it's living underground in some sort of chamber that's being heated by a volcanic source with ice melting into water and sort of an underground stew that could maintain life. It's possible. We have no evidence that it's there. That'll be something we'll be looking for, but we don't have any direct evidence that it's there yet.
They might go hundreds or thousands of kilometers over a couple of week period to study the rocks and to take samples and bring them back. And they'd be able to do some of the analysis on those samples right there on the surface. So if they found something really interesting, they could maybe go back out and look a little bit more to find out what was going on.
Given the availability of resources on the planet, the planned establishment of at least a semi-permanent base on Mars is also being researched. An important mission goal will be to assess the possibility of maintaining a long-term human presence on the planet.
They'll also look at what the resources are that can be utilized. At some point, they will actually start drilling into the surface and seeing whether they can extract water from the subsurface, look for evidence of liquid water down below the permafrost, perhaps drill holes down and try to tap into a water supply, or utilize other ways to extract water from the environment to support the outpost. They'll learn eventually how to make bricks and how to refine the dust to make iron and metals and such. The materials should be there. And so you can imagine that in time, you could derive everything that you needed for living there on the surface from the surface materials.
We know there's water because we can see the polar caps. And the water, in fact, when Viking did an analysis, they found that the dirt was full of water. In fact, it was so full of water it saturated their instruments, so we don't know how much water there is. But water has been somehow absorbed into the soil. And so there's water, there's oxygen can be made out of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Oxygen can be gotten out of the rocks because we know they're iron oxide. And so you've got power and oxygen and water and dirt. What else do you need?
What we would do for a while is take little factories that we build on Earth and set them up there with their power supplies and let them produce. At least in the beginning and early stages, it's just a few people, so you don't need a lot of factories to do that. In fact, the plant that is necessary to produce the propellant to send a crew of 6 back from Mars is probably not much bigger than an ordinary office desk.
At the conclusion of their stay, 6 months to a year after arriving, the crew would leave all of the facilities intact, so that following missions may also make use of the settlement. Heavily laden with rock and soil samples, as well as fuel processed on the Martian surface, oxygen extracted from the thin carbon dioxide atmosphere, and foodstuffs grown in the Martian soil, the crew would prepare to take their leave of Mars.
Director Gene Kranz now taking a status check with his team. Go, no go for ascent. Standing by.
Ryan, you go for liftoff. Capcom? Ecom. Surgeon. GNC. Guidance, you happy? Go. Fido. Go. Capcom, we're go for liftoff.
Houston, you're cleared for takeoff. Roger, understand. We're number 1 on the runway. Port stage and ascent. Beautiful. Very smooth. Very quiet ride. Eagle Houston, going right down the track. Everything's great.
Once in orbit, the launch vehicle would perform the delicate task of a rendezvous and docking with the orbiter. This maneuver would likewise be conducted without any assistance whatsoever from mission control. After nearly 2 years into this mission, the crew would then have to settle in for the year-long journey home. Some scientists believe that the astronauts and Martian rock samples should be delivered to a laboratory on board the International Space Station for a long quarantine prior to returning to Earth. Once the safety of the crew and the safe handling of the cargo is assured, both would then be transferred for the flight back to Earth.
When we bring samples back from Mars, we want to be very careful and cautious to make sure that there's nothing in that sample that could be a danger to the biosphere, not just to humans, but to anything. We all have seen examples where organisms introduced into a new place where they've never been before have wreaked havoc on the ecosystems there. So for that reason, the current plan is that when a sample is brought back to Mars, we treat it as if it's full of pathogenic, dangerous microorganisms. We treat it like it's a jar of Ebola or something, and until we can demonstrate to ourselves that it's safe, we hold it in a facility like you would if you were dealing with a very dangerous microorganism on Earth.
Upon their safe arrival on Earth, these astronauts are likely to receive the biggest hero's welcome since the return of the Apollo 11 moon mission in 1969, when Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin placed the first human footprints on the lunar surface. The full extent of future implications for life on Earth as a result of the Mars mission cannot yet be determined. Should life forms be found in Mars rock samples, further expeditions and additional searches for life elsewhere in the universe are sure to follow. Such a momentous discovery will certainly afford humankind reason for reflection on our own existence and place in the universe. Like the Apollo program that spearheaded the American technological boom of the 1970s and 80s, the technological benefits to humanity as a result of explorations on Mars are limitless.
If we can learn to live on Mars, or even to visit Mars, we can learn to live in other places. But we're not going to learn to live in any place else in the solar system until we've learned to live on Mars. Mars is not much harder to get to than the moon, fuel-wise. It just takes longer. And Mars has all kinds of resources that the moon doesn't have. So Mars is just a lot friendlier place to visit than any place else in the solar system. So I think it's inevitable that's where we're going to go.
The United States is a spacefaring nation. The purpose of an agency like NASA and a laboratory like JPL is to essentially expand that frontier of human activity, to constantly move out, to do things no one else has done so that human activity can gradually expand into the full realm of space. And that is, I think, a very important part of the future of this nation.
Right now, we're sending robots to Mars. But why are we sending robots to Mars? In my mind, we're sending robots to Mars as scouts. They're going to check it out so that that can be followed by humans. Why are humans going to Mars? Humans are going to Mars to see if it could be a long-term home for life. We're also scouts. We're scouts for the broader phenomenon called life. And ultimately, that will lead possibly to terraforming Mars and putting a biosphere there. And it's important, I think, to think of these as a continuum. Think of them as steps along the way. And the ultimate goal, at least in my mind, is another planet that has life.
We now can talk seriously about the settlement of the moon, where settlements are self-sufficient, and the settlement of Mars, where those settlements are self-sufficient. And indeed, at least the moon and Mars provide an option for the human species to establish new ecological enclaves elsewhere away from our Earth. The resources almost certainly are there for self-sufficiency. So Mars settlements will indeed be able to take care of themselves over the long haul. But to get things started, the moon again is the bridge, and the keystone to that bridge is helium-3. That seems to me to be a very important philosophical goal for the human species, as well as one which is extremely exciting to many, many young people.
What we enjoy most, as a scientist, is that by getting together, we can have better ideas. You see, the people are brought up in different environments and we have different educational backgrounds. And they have their own different ideas about what should be done and what to do. And when these people from different countries get together with different backgrounds, different cultures mix. And that's the most interesting part. And with that, we can come up with the greater ideas for the exploration. Of course, I'm not disliking the benefit of financial, citing the financial benefit and technological benefit. All these are there, but to us, the greatest fun is the mixing of the culture.
There's a lot of water that has to pass under the bridge. There's no need to make decisions now, but there's certainly a need to dream and think of possibilities. And that's what we're all about at NASA. We're about dreams and visions. And while we undertake a logical sequence to get towards these dreams, we bring back economic benefits and intellectual benefits to make our life richer on Earth. It's not spending money in space, it's enriching life on Earth, and that's what we're all about.